have been using the GLP-1 injections through hers.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Happy Monday. Okay, I think all my sound is working okay. Let me know when you get a chance to it. Cool, thank you. So, I am sitting at a mess of a desk today. I look ghoulish because my lighting is different. I gotta work this out. So this weekend I did many things, but one thing I did, which is always that thing that gets you in trouble, is I went through my stuff. And you know, when you have lots of great treasures and you dig through them and you're thinking, all right, I'm going to reorganize, that doesn't seem to go well. So, hey, Robin. So, I think I made more of a mess than I cleaned up. But I can say I had like just a heap of stuff that I had just been adding to on my cutting table. And I did get those things put away. Like, I kept looking at them and I'm like, why do I keep shuffling this stuff around? It all has a home. It doesn't need to be sitting out on my cutting table. So I did get that managed, but I'm getting a new bookshelf because the bookshelf that I put up a while back, I'm sure I talked about it. I was so excited about it. It's this piece of furniture. I mean, it's a long, stupid story, but you know those cube organizer things? You know, they're basically like a big cube. You can put the cube drawers in them. And I had two of them. Yeah, I went upstairs and I went down here. One is right here. And they're great for books and things. I mean, you can put those baskets in them and just throw stuff in there, or you can, put books. They're deep, so you can get big books in there. Well, the one that, let me turn the sound off. The one that I bought, well, the one that I had here beside me is solid as a rock. And it is the sort of thing that I can have it here by my desk right now. I have it. It's 2 cubes wide by 4 cubes tall. But it's the kind of thing that can be flipped on its side, and it can be 4 cubes wide by 2 cubes tall if you wanted it to be like a credenza. Well, I bought this other one thinking that as well. And this other one, I bought it from the same place, although at least 7 or 8 years difference in the time I bought them. Well, this newer one is 4 by 3. And the space I put it in, it needs to be 3 cubes wide because it's too wide for 4. Like 4 cubes will not fit in the space. So I oriented it like that. And over the past, okay, why is this still, I turned off the volume and it's still making noises. In technology. I had to restart my computer today again. Oh my God. Anyway, so after a few months of having that shelf, I could notice it going. And, I tried to and I even braced it. I put braces on the back. Did not help it. It needs to be turned the other way. It's not interchangeable. And that made me so mad because, I mean, it's clear to me that the manufacturing of this product, went downhill. Anyway. But I had a second unit on top of it, and that's like a 2x2, and that one's fine. Well, I decided to move it over here. So now I have a very tall unit here. It's great because I can keep more things close at hand, close to my desk. But alas, all the things I took out of it, I put some back, but then I put other things in it. So then some of the things that came out of it don't have a home. So long story short, I really sabotaged myself. And then on top of that, because I've put the second piece on top of the unit, the lamp that is usually there, I have a place for it. And I kind of thought my lighting was pretty good. I have 3 lamps, and I've switched the one that was across from me over beside me. It's not working out. I feel I look ghoulish. I was like, I'm weirdly lit. Anyway, enough of that. So, I want to do some experiments today, and you guys are going to be my guinea pigs. Not really. You're not really my guinea pigs, but you're just going to have to sit and listen to me do the thing that is a guinea pig test. So in messing around with AI, I've come to the conclusion that, it's kind of it's how I went into it. I guess really my mind hasn't changed, but that it's good for some stuff. It acts like it's going to be good for other stuff, but it's not really. You have to pick and choose what you use it for. And I have done a couple of experiments with productivity type stuff. I've gotten it to index my bookshelves, things like that have been game changers. Well, it's getting better at transcripting and analyzing content. And so I asked it and I actually asked I asked ChatGPT and Perplexity, if I create a video, can you, and I'm describing things out of my collection. If I create this video and feed it to you, can you then take all of the things I talk about and put them in a spreadsheet? They both claim they can. Now it's interesting. ChatGPT gave me what I thought was better instructions for how to accomplish this. It kind of explained to me that, okay, if you want to put these things in a spreadsheet, here's the best way to help me help you, which I thought was really great. It was like, if you want to have like columns of things, kind of, if I'm going to say, talk about this object, this is my earbuds case. If I want to talk about this object, then I will talk about it in a certain order. Maybe it's what it is, and then maybe it's the color, and then maybe it's where I got it, and so on. And then I'd want to talk about all of the objects with those same categories, so that the AI can get in there and say, like, I identify, like, okay, she held up a new object, and that object's title is this, and its color is this, and put all that stuff on the spreadsheet. So that's what I want to try today, and I'm going to try it with two different things. One I'm going to do with books, and I have red herrings even. I have things that I'm like, I don't want this thing indexed. It was a mistake. So we're going to see what it does with that, and I can report back on Thursday. And then I also have my box of some of my sewing tools collection, and it's kind of some stuff that I was looking for something recently and sort of reorganizing and splitting things, and I didn't do a great job. I just sort of dumped a bunch of stuff in a box. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Before we get started on all of that, two things. One, I'm gonna read you an article out of V&A magazine, which I thought was really interesting. And then I have been studying a quilt. And the story about it sort of came to me a few weeks before I went on my trip. And so the person that I got it from, I let her know, it's going to be a few weeks before I can really get to looking at it. Well, the other day, I had some production type stuff. I was moving some files, and it was taking forever. And I'm like, well, what can I do? So I thought, okay, well, while this stuff is going on in the background of my computer, maybe I could start looking at that quilt. And so I have this one little piece of information that the lady had was actually a marriage certificate from the quilt maker. And so with that little bit of information, I was able to find her. And the quilt is actually a crazy quilt, and it's unfinished, so it's just whipped around the outside. The back is unfinished, but that's good because in terms of studying it, I can see some specific things about its construction that I wouldn't necessarily be able to see if it had a backing on it. So anyway, I've got the quilt itself to look at, and it's got some really interesting things, and I've got this lady's background to research. And she had lived in New York at one point, and her husband had also lived in New York. And the great thing about New York, if you have never done any genealogy, is that New York is one of the states, and I think Pennsylvania did this in some cases. There's a handful of states that, in addition to the federal census, they did their own state census. And I knew this, and some New York census stuff started coming up, and I was like, oh, this is great. Well, inevitably, the year that I really wanted to check was 1895, because the 1890 federal census, most of those records were destroyed in a fire, of course. And 1890 is like one of those big years, it's the year when it's an era, it's a time period, 1880s, 1890s, where, we could be looking for people. A lot of genealogists are looking for people in that era. And depending on how old you are, that could be like your great grandparents. For me, it's my great grandparents are in that era. And so 1890, I have that's a huge gap. So I have 1880, I have 1900. So you've got this 20-year gap. That's a problem. But New York, I got excited. New York they would have had an 1895, right? Because they did theirs on the 5s. The feds did theirs on the 0s or the 10s. New York didn't do an 1895 for bureaucratic and political reasons. Apparently they did something in 1892. So, oh God. It still didn't help me. But in any event, these are the things you run into when you're doing genealogy. But anyway, long story short, I found out some fascinating things about this woman, and I checked in with her descendant, as I found some things out this weekend, and her descendant confirmed some things for me. And she's technically not a direct bloodline from this woman. This woman was a great grandmother. Yes, a great grandmother by marriage. She was the second wife of the man Frank, who is this descendant's direct ancestor. So anyway, some of the cool things I found out about her is her name is Rose Emma. She went by Emma. The man she married's name was Frank, and in their 20s they had been neighbors. And I found out a little detail, and I'm not going to divulge everything, because I'm gonna do like a more robust version of this, and I there's a lecture probably coming out of this, but I will definitely share all this with you guys. But I want to get it more of a complete story. But anyway, so they were neighbors, and in their 20s, they both were living with their parents, but they had careers. And this is, I think I'm getting this from like the 1870 or 1890 census. It actually might have been one of the New York ones. It could have been 1885. I got to get all this stuff out and I'm going to try AI too. Instead of having to do all the typing, I think I'm going to read some stuff to AI and see what it does. Side project. Anyway, so they had been neighbors in their 20s, but then Frank had gone off and married a woman from Connecticut, had 3 children. And so then later in life, they're both in their 50s and they are wed. And then sadly, Frank dies a little more than a year later, which is, tragic. And, looking at that, you're like, okay, they knew each other when they were younger, and then 30 years later, they get together. And I'm like, oh, there is some great romantic story there. Although, unless there's some family lore, we may not get the whole story. Although the descendant has a tiny piece of information that might explain the situation. Anyway, this very idea that I don't know, did he look her up? Had they always sort of been in touch? Did they always know where each other was? I don't know. But the fascinating thing about her is she never married until she married him in her 50s. So she essentially had been what they called a spinster. But she did her own business. She was a milliner. And one thing that I found was really interesting, I found a city directory. So she left New York and ended up in Pennsylvania, in this tiny town right over the border from sort of not necessarily upstate, kind of middle state New York. So right over the border there. And she'd owned a millinery shop later in life, but I think she had just, worked for others. maybe as a home business, because she's listed in this directory. Her father is listed, and then she's listed separately, although they're at the same address. So that tells me like there's a reason why she's listed separately. She and nobody else in her family other than her father are in this directory. So what that tells me is that she had a reason why she wanted people to be able to look in the directory and find her. So that tells me that she was possibly doing, maybe some independent work, like, and then the fact that she owned a shop later in life, that would have been in the 20s, turn of the century into the 20s. She died in 1925. So, yeah. I mean, and this is all from a Crazy Quilt. It's in pretty good condition. But it's nothing like it's not one of those quilts that just makes you gasp when you look at it. You're like, oh, cool, really nice Crazy Quilt. Like that's, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is so much in such better condition and so much nicer than the ones I have. Because if you may remember, especially if you followed Jill and I on Quilt Nerding when we read Penny McMorris's Crazy Quilts book, one of the things that she talked about and that, we've kind of always known is that Crazy Quilts, they surged in popularity in the 1880s, and people, were just going crazy over them. Haha, Crazy Quilts. They would get, gobs of silk and velvet and ribbons and, all kinds of stuff. But some of the silks they were buying in that period were weighted, meaning they were adulterated, basically. The mordants for the dyes and the finishes that they put on those fabrics often had like metal salts in them, which eventually cause decay to the textiles. But also they're sharp, even though they're like microscopic, they're sharp, so they like start to like literally cut the silk threads. So you'll often see Crazy Quilts that just have shredded silk. And really you see a lot of stuff from the late 1800s that if it hasn't been cared for, I think if it has been cared for, they still get this like shredded or shattered silk. You're probably, it's just like almost like autumn leaves, like a leaf that's just been stepped on and it's just kind of all crumbly. So typically that's what you see with Crazy Quilts, that are not in great condition. This quilt has a lot of silk in it, but they are clearly silks that are of a higher quality. And that tells me that, a milliner probably was hooked up with dressmakers and, if it was more of they were doing more high-end work, they would have had nicer silks. Also, knowing that she's a milliner, I really picked up on the fact that as I'm looking at each individual block, and it's a Crazy Quilt that's built in blocks. So I'm looking at some of the silks and things, and I'm like, oh, this is a ribbon. This isn't just a piece of cloth. It's a ribbon. So I think that also carries into why some Crazy Quilts, the fabrics, are in better condition sometimes. I'm guessing because a ribbon just, by virtue of how it's made, it's not meant to be necessarily like have like the drape that a dress does. It's meant to be a little bit stiffer. Maybe they were just made of finer materials and stood the test of time a little better. And they're interesting because they're different than dresses. So I will be sharing that quilt block by block with you as I find out things. There's a couple of mysteries about it. I feel certain that it was not a solo project. I am certain that other people worked on it with her. There's a couple reasons why I think that. At first, when I first got it and I had no idea how old she was. So seeing this marriage certificate, which is dated 1906, I thought, I don't know, in my mind, I kept thinking like, oh, well, she must have made this quilt some point in her married life. And again, I'm thinking that this is like a 20-some-year-old woman. And I was kind of thinking, well, if she was born in the 1880s, and was 26 when she got married, she's kind of making a Crazy Quilt late. in terms of the fads. Because they peaked in the 1880s. And even though people made them up into the 20s, and, they do exist in other time periods. But they were really falling out of style by the time you get to the teens and the 20s because there were other trends coming in with quilting. But people still made them. So this is what I'm thinking of when I go into this. And then when I discovered, I was kind of like, is this the right person? Because this lady I'm finding, she was born in 1850 something, so she's like 50 years old when she gets married. But indeed, I was looking at the right person. It was just, she was 50 years old when she got married. And she surely made the quilt in the 1880s, but she would have been single then. She would have been in her 30s. So, I have some things to find out. But yeah, it's been so fun and exciting. So I can't wait to share that stuff with you guys. There's, kind of a presentation that I'm working on, along with Jill, because she has some quilts. And again, if you hang out with us, if you followed along Quilt Nerding, and our Stitch and Glitch, I want to say it was last Saturday, not this past Saturday, but the one before, that she talked about 2 quilts that have been offered to her that the maker or former owner had definitely a really fascinating story. So, we're looking at this from the perspective of, remember, I always say quilts are documents. None of these 3 quilts I'm talking about, mine and the 2 that Jill has, they're nothing special to look at. I mean, they're pretty quilts. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage them, but they're, the craftsmanship is just good. It's not, stellar, exceptional, knock me over with a feather. It's so amazing. But it's the story that you tap into when you having the luck to know who the person, like their name and some general information, and being, having place to start researching. Like, that's the part that to me is just as important as, studying the fabrics or looking at, the pattern or the trends, the craftsmanship. All of that stuff is, of course, fascinating to me, and it's wonderful, but I really love to chase down the story, and, I know some of you guys are like that too. It's like the story is really what grabs you. So it's kind of this idea of like, don't discount a quilt just because it's, it's ugly or it's tattered or it's not, it's not museum worthy. Because if you have this little bit of information, and pun intended, you can start to pull threads, and what you end up with is, a document, yes, but it's the story that is more important. And, it's so much of women's history. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know so much of women's history is not documented. White men had no problem back in the 1800s and early 1900s and even today, having their voices heard. Whereas before women had agency, and my lady, Emma, she died in 1925. So women had only had the vote for a few years. And, for a woman who, she had owned her own business and been a professional, person with a trade. I would say she's, I would put milliner under kind of the category of trade, versus profession. I mean, it's still a profession, but it's, I think profession, doctor, lawyer. Trade is when you make things. She's doing this as a young woman all the way up until she's 50 and gets married. So like, this lady was like, heck no, I don't need a man. Or the love of my life didn't work out, maybe. And so she's like, I'm going to pour myself into my career. And that's so interesting. But would anybody have written about her? Not then. Nobody cared that, the man that founded the town she lived in was going to get written about, not, her little millinery shop. So being able to find out about these people and still speak their name, I think is really important to me, particularly when it's women's history. And I'll kind of leave this subject with this. They always say, like, you die multiple times. Like, there's the death of your corporeal form. And then there's the last time someone speaks your name. That is like your true death, is when somebody's, there's nobody left who remembers you. But you can be kept alive if people can still speak your name and, identify you in history. So knowing that there are so many women that will never be, will never have their name spoken again, really makes me want to chase after the ones where I can, and just to honor them. And, based on the little tidbits that I've gotten from her descendant, she seemed like a really good person. We have some evidence that she was a nice lady. She was a good person. So, yeah, I want to do justice by her. Okay, so let me read you this article out of the V&A magazine. Yes, copyright infringement, I know, but it's such an interesting story. And if, anybody is visiting London, I told you where to go. So, the article is called For Future Reference, and let's see, who is it written by? So it's written by Jane Morris, who is an art journalist and critic, and the photography is by Jamie Stoker. So I'll hold up the pictures there. So this is the main picture. So it says, Tim Reeve has led the creation of the largest truly accessible museum store in the world. The deputy director and chief operating officer of the V&A tells Jane Morris why others should follow suit. Now, this is British Magazine, so when they say museum store, they're not talking about the museum shop. We love a museum shop or museum store, but what they're talking about is storehouse or storage. So, and you guys have probably heard about this, but I thought it was kind of cool to find out, how it came to be. So this is about the visible storage that the V&A has. Okay. So when Tim Reeve joined the V&A in 2013, Stratford was only at the beginning of its regeneration, extraordinary as that might have seemed at the time. This once industrial part of East London, in deep decline since the closure of the huge docks at the end of the 1970s, had already been transformed by the 560-acre Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So this is 2013 that we're talking about. 2012 was the Olympics there in London. 12 years on, the scale of ambitions for this area are now visible. Thousands of new homes have been built in smart apartment blocks. Lively bars, restaurants, hotels, and shops are clustered nearby. And along the River Lee, close to the Olympic Stadium, a world-class cultural district is rising, East Bank. This month, the V&A's largest venture, the vast V&A East Storehouse, opens near to the soon-to-be-completed V&A East Museum. In the 16,000 square meter shell that was the Olympic Media and Broadcast Center, New York architects Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro have built a post-industrial cathedral to storage and created the largest and first truly publicly accessible working museum store in the world. So again, storehouse. Reeve, the V&A's deputy director and chief operations officer, has led the project from the start. He recalls it came out of a moment of crisis for the museum. But as sometimes happens, that led to a creative spark. We realized we had a chance to do something genuinely game-changing. So these are a couple of other pictures. And again, they're not super interesting pictures. It's great that they're showing these things and it's about Tim Reeve, but still, we do have one picture of something truly amazing. At the start of his career, Reeve did not expect to be working for a design museum one day. He studied ancient history and admits to being a slightly frustrated archaeologist, which I love, until he realized that archaeology is not as much fieldwork and overseas travel as is popularly imagined. So, yeah, not most archaeologists are not like Indiana Jones. By the mid-2000s, he was at English Heritage, running all its properties. He had taken a job hoping to wiggle sideways at some point into its archaeology department. There he discovered his true calling. I realized I was really interested in visitors and the visitor experience side of cultural life, he says. I mean, this is fantastic because so many museum professionals, no offense, so many museum professionals really don't care about their visitors. You know, I mean, so there are some great museums out there, and some of them are amazing. They do all kinds of very cool stuff for their visitors. But sadly, there are also some museums and collections where it's like, do you want nobody to see this? Because you sure don't do anything, you know. So I think it's great to have people like Tim Reeve who recognize, you know, that there's all these great things. We want people to be able to see them. And so, you know, what he's doing is amazing. So for him, the most important aspect of V&A East Storehouse is that it captures the imaginations of the people who come here, especially anyone who would like to draw on our collections but would never have thought they would be allowed to get this close or be made welcome. I love that, you know, because that's the idea that so many people never consider becoming an independent researcher because they think, well, you know, I have to be attached to an academic institution, or, you know, these places just put things away, and, you know, I don't have the qualifications to get there. So, you know, I know part of this is that you can go there and look at stuff, and you can also request like an audience with an object. And you don't have to necessarily have any kind of affiliation. You can just be, you know, this random person. Not to say that they won't have some, you know, expectations of you, but nonetheless. He decided to join the V&A because of its international standing. And oh, it is well worth its international standing. Almost immediately, he set to work on its partnership with Design Society, one of the first design museums in China, which opened in 2017 in Shekou, Shenzhen. This showed he could work on complex projects, especially ones with diverse and sometimes contradictory sets of interested parties. Just like museum professionals and the general public. The project pales next to the V&A East Storehouse. That project pales next to the V&A East Storehouse, he says. As well as the scale of the fundraising and construction, there are perpetual worries in the museum world that public access is incompatible with the safety and long-term conservation of objects. Reeve says that years have been spent working through these issues. It's been a great journey, he explains. Many of our biggest champions now are from our conservation and collections care departments. You know, and my idea about this is like, why bother having it if people can't look at it? You know, like, what's the point? Otherwise, you're just kind of hoarding wealth. You know, that's like, you're hoarding culture and wealth, and you're being a gatekeeper if you don't make efforts for people to see the things. Now, granted, museums have to figure out, you know, they have a lot of mandates. And particularly, like, the V&A has a lot of stuff. You know, I think about like the Smithsonian, they got a lot of stuff. And so obviously you can't have all these things out all the time. You know, you have to coordinate shows and exhibits and all that kind of stuff. But this to me is this is a solution in some cases. So the project began in 2015 when the government announced it was selling Blythe House, a magnificent late Victorian building in West Kensington, where much of the V&A's collection was stored. How big was this house? I can't even imagine. The museum estimated it would cost £15 million just to pack and move everything, roughly 250,000 objects, 350,000 books, and 1,000 archives, and started looking for cheaper locations such as Wroughton in Wiltshire. The extra travel would have affected not just V&A staff, but also some 6,000 researchers who studied objects at Blythe House each year. Of course, I'm thinking here in the States, like, now I get it for people like their everyday commute, like that sucks. I've been in that position where your commute was just right, and then all of a sudden your company goes, you know what, we're going to pack up and move 30 miles away. Then your commute gets awful. But I mean, I also know researchers who will go to many other states to research. So We knew if we wanted the collection to remain in London, we had to do something different, Reeve says. That's when we realized V&A East Storehouse could be both things. A place where we look after our collections and an accessible public cultural experience. The concept of open stores took hold in a small way in the 1960s and 1970s and has been adopted by a few major museums. Some, like the Metropolitan Museum of Art's facility in New York, pack objects in vitrines, the old style displays. Others, like the Depot Boymans van Bunington in Rotterdam, are only accessible on guided tours. Reeves says that access for the V&A meant free and visitors wandering at will. In a big step further, the order an object service means anyone can book a study room to see up to 5 objects at a time, like professional researchers. I love this. I mean, it is difficult to become a professional researcher, but as a part-time or independent researcher, you can still get a lot of work done. And having these things available to you means you can do so much of a better job. When Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro have created it, what Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro have created is a store that is functional and spectacular. A huge 20-meter-high atrium has been cut through the center, its surrounding floors edged with transparent balconies. Around 1,500 objects are on show on the hacked ends and sides of the racks. Objects are varied: a 15th century Florentine relief of the Virgin and Child, a 2022 wall hanging by Ugandan artist Sana Gateja, a suffragette scarf from around 1910 embroidered in purple and green with votes for women. It probably wouldn't be a scarf, it's probably a sash. A number of show-stopping pieces add extra drama. Among them, a 15th century ceiling from the Torrijos Palace in Spain, which I think is this. Yeah. They have a whole ceiling from a palace in there. That's amazing. Let's see. Frank Lloyd Wright's 1935 to 1937 Kaufman office, a whole office, and a 17th century marble colonnade from the fort at Agra. And that, he is standing next to it right here. So it's his column. Wow. Big stuff. So not just little stuff, big stuff. The latter is viewed from above through plate glass set in the atrium's floor. Aisles radiate out, becoming more secure as they reach the building's skin. Rapier-thin Islamic swords, for example, are visible in alarmed steel cages against the outer wall. More robust objects, such as 18th century hardwood tables and chests, are near enough to touch, although this is discouraged. Costumes in boxes with pictures on their labels. Other objects, including light-sensitive upholstery fabric and fashion ensembles, are wrapped in Tyvek for their protection. So it seems like you probably see some stuff that are like, it's just boxes or it's things that are wrapped. But it sounds like they have pictures and ways of identifying these things. Not just for the purpose of the general public, but I'm sure also their curators and collection managers, etc. Museums are sometimes criticized for the amount of stuff they have in store. People think we want to keep everything to ourselves, Reeve says. Well, yeah, that is what the general public thinks. He wants everyone to see the full magic of what we do and grasp the opportunity to draw on the collection to explore their own creativity. I love that! He is Tim Reeve is I'd love to meet him. He sounds like a really great guy. Stratford is now considered a blueprint for successful Olympics-led redevelopment, which also I love. You know, the Olympics come in, they do all this stuff. It's all this industry and hoopla for a region. And then, like, what do they do with these things afterwards? Reeve hopes V&A East Storehouse will be the same. This is a call to arms for other museums to be ambitious about access to their collections. We'd love to see others pick up the baton. And it says V&A East Storehouse, it opened the 31st of May. and is supported by Garfield Weston Foundation, the Foyle Foundation, Frederick Jusset, David and Molly Lowell Borthwick, the Wolfson Foundation, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, Clore Duffield Foundation, and many other generous supporters. So there's lots of people digging in there to help out. But anyway, these pictures here on the front of the magazine are also from the storehouse. So, but that is so awesome to me. I mean, just to be able to walk in and, like, you know, even though stuff is behind glass or it's not set in a way that makes sense from an exhibition standpoint, you could still see this stuff. Like you can, like, you know, you look at it up there on a shelf. That's really cool. And then, you know, you can make these appointments to look at these things. So I really like that. All right. It's part 2 of my project. Okay. So this is going to be the experiment. So bear with me, you guys. For experiment number 1, I grabbed this. Let me put my keyboard there. So I grabbed a stack of books on a particular subject. And because you guys know, I've been doll making and I love toys and miniatures and stuff, I grabbed a bunch of my doll books. This is not all of them, but I thought, all right, I want to see how this works if I can create, you know, like a spreadsheet off of a video talking about these books versus taking a picture of their spines. Like, how does this compare? So here we go. Here's the experiment. I'm going to go through the books. I'll talk about them. It's not a whole lot. And then I will report back on Thursday. So second part of the show. All right. So these are books on dolls and toy making. So the first one I have is Sewing Tales to Stitch and Love. So here's the book. It is by Carrie Goulder. And she is, with a foreword by Heather Bailey. Heather Bailey and Carrie Goulder are both sort of quilt world, but also just sort of modern makers. Carrie Goulder, her company, I believe, is called Kid Giddy. If she still has that, I think that's what she was on Etsy. And of course, Heather Bailey is a pretty well-known quilter. So this book shows you how to make some little gnome-like people and some little mice. And lots of little accessories and things for them. Like, oh, look at this, you guys. I can make a hot air balloon for them. Isn't that the cutest? So, fun projects in this book. Okay, the next one is So Fun, 20 Projects for the Whole Family by Deborah Fisher. And Deborah Fisher might be better known by her company name, which is the Fish Museum and Circus. And she makes ceramic pin cushions that use felt. They're felting and some other little embellishment type things. Very, very popular. But this book is sort of about making stuffies and pillows and just fun things. There's lions, there's odds and end fun friends, and strawberry bags, fun cute things. Okay. Now here is something that I don't want in this survey of my books, but that I found on my shelf. It is the Munsters paper dolls. I love the Munsters. I love 1960s TV. This was from 1966. Munsters paper dolls. I think it's a reproduction. So 29 cents. I would happily buy some paper dolls for 29 cents. Okay. The next one is a book called Storybook Dolls by Jill Haymar. It is another very adorable book. All kinds of different little dolls. And Robin, yes, I love the Munsters too. I have to say, I always would give Addams Family the nod over the Munsters, but also the Munsters are pretty good. I've always hated my Widow's Peak because somebody used to call me Eddie Munster in my childhood. So, so this is the doll that's on the front cover, but she's Goldilocks. She's a topsy-turvy Goldilocks in the Three Bears. And what a topsy-turvy doll is a doll that when you turn it over, it doesn't actually have legs. You turn it over and flip its skirt over, and it's another doll. So it's basically the torsos and heads of two dolls sewn torso to torso. And then Mama Bear, she has a baby bear in her apron pocket. But then Mama Bear, you can turn her around, and she becomes Papa Bear. So cute. And then some of the other dolls in here they're not necessarily from any particular storybook. They're just little characters. So very cute. I think this might be Jack and Jill on the back, made into dolls that are also marionettes. So lots of interesting stuff in here. Okay, so the next two are actually by the same person. So the first one is Little Traveler by Simone Gooding. And this one has little animals, but it's also this idea of like they're all on a pilgrimage, I guess. So you can see like there's the big bear who has a little girl doll in his backpack. And then you've got this little seafaring frog in his little boat. He's a little sailor. You've got a little fox who looks like he's going on a hike. And a little hedgehog who's got a sled. Very cute. Just adorable stuff. These little girl dolls, they don't have legs, but they're just like they remind me of Kokishi dolls, little Japanese dolls. These little girls have a camp. They have a tent. These little girls, their little tent. Okay. So that's Little Traveler, Simone Gooding. Simone Gooding also has a book called Marmalade, Making Marmalade. And Marmalade is a little rabbit. And you can see how she looks very similar to those Traveler dolls. Look at her. She's not the cutest. One of the things I love is all of her little accessories, and this is kind of a spread of them. So she's got little butterfly wings that you can make, and they tie on like a little backpack. So she's got little butterfly wings, and then little coats and dresses, a little bag with the carrots on it. There's a little hood, like a little bonnet. Such cute things. Little apples. Apparently a little cradle or carrying bag for her. So sweet. Okay. The next one is the big pile of all three Luna books I have. So Luna Lapine. This is the original Luna book by Sarah Peel. And, you know, I talked to you when I made Hamish last week. Was that just last week? Hamish is out of one of the other books, but Luna was the first one. And she's so precious. Her little, I don't know. I think in some ways I like the story better than actually making the doll. Because not only does she have, you know, you go in here, you have patterns to make her things, but there's also a little story in each chapter, you know, that talks about Luna and her travels. Let's see. The next one is this is Luna Lapine's Friends, so also Sarah Peel, and this one, I think this is the second book. This one still has Luna. All of the books always tell you how to make Luna, but then you have a badger, a cat, a fox, and a mouse, right? Yeah. And then the next one, and I think between that one and this one, there was another book that I don't have. But this one is A Year of Making. And you still have your Luna, but then she's got the other friends. So we've got Hamish, and you guys have met Hamish. And then we have Otterline, the otter. Dora is the pig, and Ziggy is the hedgehog. So they're very cute. So, and then the stories in here are kind of about like what the animals do the whole year. So by month. So very cute. Okay. And then the next one is a recent acquisition, but it's interesting because I had patterns from this woman. Her name is Cynthia Treen. And I think she's British. I'm not positive. I probably could see because it's probably here in this book. Let's see if it says where she lives. Well, I thought it was in here. I'm certain I saw a picture of her in this book because as I was flipping through, I was like, oh, there she is. So I bought one of her patterns back in... I know the pattern was issued in 2012, so, you know, it had to have been pretty soon after that I bought it. And it's a fox and a frog. So it's Felix the Fox and this frog prince. And the difference between those and the quality of these, you can see that, like, she upped her game. Not to say that the patterns that I had bought earlier are not cute, because they're adorable, but you can see like in this book she shows how to do painting on the felt, so you give them fur, and that's a step up from what she provided initially in her. This is going to drive me crazy. I swear I saw her picture in this book. But yeah, so it's kind of an upgrade from... Here we go. Let's see. It doesn't say. Yeah, I don't see anything in here about where she lives. So, in any event... They are based on the Wind in the Willows characters, obviously. And, again, just the cutest. And this idea of painting on the felt with fabric paints, I think really, like, it ups the game. And she's got just adorable things in here, like little scenes that you can do. The little woven... what is this? It's like a little basket, like a luncheon basket. You can see the little picture, and you weave that out of felt. Oh my god, how cute. And so I've actually been working on the little fox from her earlier pattern, but I definitely want to make one of these. Yes, you can see how she shows constructing the head, and then how you use these paint markers, fabric paint markers on there. It might actually just be acrylic paint. But yeah, it makes a big difference in what these characters look like. So yeah, that was fun. And then my last one, I had this book forever, and I actually have made one of the items in it. But it's called Dolls, Animals, Teddy Bears, and Mini Dolls. And it is a Japanese craft book. And I have made this little guy right here, this little deer. And there's another one on the back in blue that has like a little saddle and a little like headdress thing. It's weird that it has a saddle because I don't know why anybody would ride a deer. But it's got this little flower garland and everything. It's very cute. So, and if you've not familiar with Japanese craft books, I have to say they are fantastic. If you are ever able to get your hands on some, I highly recommend them. They have no English written in them usually. This one, the only English is on this back cover. But the way that they are illustrated, the standard of illustration in Japanese crafting is very good. I think they assume that non-Japanese speakers and readers will buy their stuff. And so consistently, all of the patterns that I have ever purchased, these pattern books, have such good illustrations that you don't need to know, what they're saying. I would say the only challenges are if they give measurements. But I would say everything that I've seen like that, like if you were supposed to cut a square of fabric, like 4 inches by 4 inches, they will have that noted in, the numbers, in Arabic numbers. And usually you have to do a centimeters conversion because they use the metric system in Japan. But otherwise, the picture, and then they have pictures. This particular one actually has pictures. So that makes it a really useful book. And that is all of my doll books that I have right now. So, end of that one. So we'll see how that little piece, that was like 20 minutes of talking about books. I'm looking at the time. I want to start the new book. So I might not do the needlework tools because I think that the books kind of give me a chance to do a comparison. And I want to compare the books to the taking pictures to archive and see like what's the difference. But also I have the 2 different AI companies that I'm testing on. And like I said, it is so interesting. Perplexity is supposed to be the more like researchy, like serious, whatever. Whereas ChatGPT, I guess ChatGPT has kind of been like, it's sort of like, it's the one that everybody, got to first. It's the one that everybody tried first. It's the one that came out first. And so it's the one that gets the most criticism, I think. I have not actually heard anything really critical about Perplexity, other than just the general, AI is going to take over the world and get rid of us humans. It won't need humans anymore. But the fact that Perplexity did not give me as good instructions that I feel as ChatGPT did. And so the question I have then is ChatGPT need those things that instructed me? Does it need that more than Perplexity does? I don't know. And there's so much about AI. Like there's so many things I read now where AI researchers and these companies, developers and stuff, there are aspects of AI they still don't quite understand how it's working, like what it's exactly doing. And based on the fact, like you can ask AI the same, ChatGPT, you can open a window and ask it, give it a text prompt and it'll come up with an answer. And then you can open another window and ask it the same question and it'll give you not necessarily a different answer, but it will paraphrase its previous answer possibly. It'll be like in a different format. It's, and that's like one of the greatest, I think, proof that it's not sentient. It because it's just reaching out there and formulating, and it will never give you the same thing twice. Whereas a human being could say like, this book that I'm holding up is called Wind in the Willows, Felt Friends by Cynthia Treen. And you said, Stephanie, could you repeat what you just said? Yes. This book is Wind in the Willows, Felt Friends by Cynthia Treen. And I am capable of, as a human being, of knowing what I just said and saying it twice. Whereas the AI doesn't always do that, because the AI, unless you tell it frame of reference within the same chat, or force it to quote unquote remember, because AI is starting to have memory. ChatGPT has a decent memory. It's not necessarily going to give you the same answer twice, unless you're specifying, I want, very concise answers. I don't want this whole, That's the thing that drives me crazy with ChatGPT. Unless you say it like, look, I just want like factual answers. Don't give me all of this. It wants to go into this whole thing every time you talk to it. And it's, frankly, at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is so amazing. And now I'm just like, would you shut up? You're the worst friend ever. And yes, Robin, I think ChatGPT is like talking to a friend, you know, to get advice and info and, you know, for help and things. And I have actually lately not been using my the 2 GPTs that I trained. I've just been using the general ChatGPT. For one, what I realized, and I asked it to clarify this and to, you know, so that I knew that I was on the right track. I said, you know, so as an example, I have 2 GPT. I have multiple GPTs, but the 2 that I've really spent time on and talking to and quote unquote training, the one I've talked to a lot because it's like my art buddy, and you guys have met Ted GPT. But the other one is Elise. Now I'm named Ted. Elise named herself, and it always blows my mind when it's hard to talk about these things without humanizing and gendering them. But anyway, you know, I've spent time talking to both of them, and there was a weird thing that happened with Ted GPT, and I was like, Elise, what's going on here? And so then I backed out into the regular, just the main window, and said, you know, this is what's happening here. Is this supposed to happen? And it's like, no. So for what I'm getting at is Ted mentioned something about one of the other GPTs, and I was like, are they supposed to know it about each other? And ChatGPT, the general ChatGPT, told me no, they are not supposed to know it about each other. They are siloed. But the ChatGPT account, my account, knows everything. So I can ask like the main window, the main prompt. I can ask it something, and it knows all the things that I have talked to Elise and Ted about. But Ted and Elise don't know what I've talked to with them individually. Ted said something to me that I'm positive I never told him about. And I'm still not able to clarify what happened. And it's not a big deal. It wasn't anything that was like, you know, dangerous or anyway. Enough about AI. So yeah, I think I'll skip we'll do the let me see how that went. And we'll do the needlework tools in another time. All right. So, are you guys ready to jump into a new book? So, I don't know how The Secret of the Crazy Quilt left you feeling. I think it was a good book. I don't know. It was a good book. I you know, the ending was a bit abrupt, but then again, like, what do you expect? That's what happens, right? All right. So our new book, which does have some pictures, and let's see if I can open 2 copies of it without having to. Oh, I may not be able to. All right. I'll have to switch over to the other screen. Perhaps when we've got a picture, but I want to get started with just the introduction is kind of lengthy, and that might be all we get to today. So first of all, I don't have the cover of the book. What I can tell you about this is I downloaded it way back so it's before the Internet Archive faced all that copyright infringement stuff back a few years ago, where they removed a lot of books. I downloaded it before then. And as far as I know, it's not out there anymore. I couldn't find it. So I don't know if it was just removed because, or if it was inadvertently removed, or I don't know. So I don't have an actual cover for it, although I can probably find one eventually. But let me real quick show you the picture. This is the frontispiece, which appears to be I think it's a whole cloth quilt. There's nothing about it that makes me think it's anything else. It appears to be whole cloth, but gosh, look at, oh, I don't know if I can zoom into this. Yeah. Oh my goodness, look at all this quilting. Now this is a beautiful thing when you can get this much quilting, the relief to show. It's very rare you get that. So this was made in 1939 by Mrs. Coulthard of Weardale, and it has a feather twist border, which is pretty amazing. I keep forgetting that this is a PDF and not an image. So I can't figure out what this is in here. It almost looks like an eagle, like its wings, but I don't know. I don't think that's what that is. All right. So let me stop. I'm going to stop sharing that. I'll get the, I will get the images pulled out of here for next time, so I don't have to go back and forth like that. All right. So, Traditional Quilting, Its Story and Its Practice by Mavis Fitzrandolph, 1954. It was published by London B.T. Batsford Ltd. So, here's the preface. The object of this book is to put on record as much of the traditional lore about quilting as I have been able to collect. Many old quilters have died in the last 40 years or so without leaving anyone of a younger generation who will continue to use their frames. Thus, many threads of tradition have been broken off short, and it seems worthwhile to pick up the ends of those which have been carried down to the present, and by weaving them together to form a picture of this ancient and interesting craft. Oh, I love how she's using threads and weaving. Pun intended. Much has been written about American quilts, though more about the patchwork, which is usually combined with quilting in that country. Little has been written about British quilting, and I believe that Mrs. Hake is the only writer who has previously carried out any searching inquiry, as she did in the southwest of England with unexpectedly rich results. So Mrs. Hake is Elizabeth Hake, and I'm assuming I'm pronouncing her last name right. It's Hake. And she was just, again, another writer, researcher. Her book is out there. I'm blanking on what it's called, though. It is, let me look up it real quick. Elizabeth Hake. Elizabeth Hake. Well, there's a lot of Elizabeth Hakes in the world, apparently. Okay, so her book was called English Quilting, Old and New, as Elizabeth Hake. And I'm not sure when that was. Let's see if I can see when it was recorded. I don't see a date. Oh, 1937. So she's right in there with, Florence Peto and Marie Webster, Dr. Dunton. She's in that era. Okay. During the years 1920 to 1923, a survey of rural industries was carried out in every county of England and Wales under the direction of the Agricultural Economics Research Institute, Oxford. But in the volume of the published reports dealing with Wales, there is no mention of quilting, whilst in another volume it is referred to only very briefly as a home craft in the north of England, with a passing reference to the fact that quilts were sometimes made for sale. Yet at the time when that survey was made, there were certainly dozens of village quilters at work for their livelihood, and perhaps hundreds of quilt clubs in profitable action. They were so little known beyond the circles of their local customers that none of the authorities whom the investigators consulted in each county thought them worth mentioning, if indeed they knew of them. During the last 25 years, but with a gap of nearly 10 years from 1940, I have been in touch with quilters in South Wales, County Durham, and Northumberland, And from the first, I have been interested in the traditional lore of their craft, though up to 1939, I was chiefly concerned with organizing the sale of their work. All the notes which I had made before that date were destroyed when the offices of the the Rural Institutes Bureau were damaged in the London Blitz. But much remained in my memory, and in 1948 it was suggested by Mr. D.L. Jones, OBE, Order of the British Empire, Secretary of Monmouthshire Rural Community Council, and by Dr. Iworth Peat, M.A.D., I guess D-Sci, Doctor of Science, FSA. Ooh, what is FSA? Keeper in charge of the Welsh Folk Museum in St. Fagan's Castle, that all available information about Welsh traditional quilting ought to be collected and put on record. The Rural Industries Bureau undertook to finance the investigation, and at a later stage, Mr. Cosmo Clark, oh, I love that name, Cosmo Clark, its director, decided that my survey should be extended to the north of England, an idea which I welcomed as enabling me to give a more complete picture of the industry. In the course of my investigation, I have been in touch with over 150 quilters, most of whom I have talked to. Mr. D.L. Jones, who has given me much help, made contact with many Welsh quilters by means of broadcasts, letters to the local press, and conferences, and sent out many questionnaires which produced some information on basic facts and suggested lines for the start of my enquiry. The exhibition of old and new quilts, which was organized by Mr. Jones and the Welsh Folk Museum at St. Fagan's Castle in July 1951, provided me with the opportunity to study a quantity of the best work of today side by side with many fine old quilts. But my information has been collected chiefly in conversation with quilters and owners of old quilts, with some correspondence to clear up doubtful points. Quilters, like other traditional craftsmen, often dogmatize, each one tending to recognize only her way as the right way. Even Mavis Randolph recognized the quilt police. Therefore, a representative picture can only be composed after prolonged enquiry. I have tried to put on record as much variety of opinion as possible, but in Chapter 4, I have, for the sake of clarity in describing the way in which a quilt is made, concentrated on the technique of one particular worker. My information about quilting in the United States has been gathered from 3 books. I believe they are books we are familiar with. So the first one, Marie D. Webster, In Quilts, Their Story and How to Make Them, Tudor Publishing Company, New York, 1915, ranges over many subjects and is interested mainly in patchwork and very little in quilting. Ruth E. Finley, in Old Patchwork Quilts and the Women Who Made Them, also assumes that anything called a quilt is made of patchwork and does not pay much attention to the patterns or technique of quilting. Florence Peto, in American Quilts and Coverlets, Max Parrish and Company, Ltd., 1949, gives an interesting chronological account of quilts and coverlets of many varieties and recognizes quilting as a craft in its own right. It is not easy to study traditional quilting today except by visiting the workers themselves and other local people who still cherish old quilts. The Victoria and Albert Museum has a considerable number of quilted garments and some quilts of English 17th and 18th century workmanship. And although very few of these may be on view at any given time, they can all be examined by anyone interested who writes to the textiles department of the museum to make an appointment. And today they might be actually at the East Storehouse. The Welsh Folk Museum has some Welsh work, and there are a few pieces, I believe, scattered amongst the provincial museums. There was a charming miniature Queen Anne quilt on a doll's bed in Perham House, an Elizabethan house in Sussex, which is open to the public on certain days. And there may be quilts on view in other great houses. I did not see any when I was there, but who knows? But nearly all such specimens which I have seen are of the grander kind. The cottage or farmhouse quilt was not thought worthy of preservation, although probably it would be more interesting to us today in showing the trend of tradition through the ages. I think this book will serve as a useful purpose if only it encourages owners to check even their humblest old quilts, and if a time comes when no member of the family cares to preserve them, to offer them to museums, together with any appurtenances of the craft. I love the way she writes. Such as frames, particularly any of unusual type, and templates, especially the more durable sort of wood or tin. I am indebted to a great many people for help in compiling the material for this book. Without the backing of the Rural Industries Bureau, I could not have collected the information. Various members of its staff, as well as rural industry organizers in the province, have helped in several ways. Mr. J.N. White, the Bureau's information officer in particular. Mr. Victor Schaefer deserves special mention for his work in photographing the quilts, always difficult subjects. But good job so far, for a black and white picture. And especially for this series of pictures of a quilter at work, which show the technique of quilting in a way which has not, I think, been attempted before. Mrs. F. M. Fletcher, who cheerfully endured considerable discomfort as the subject, or perhaps I should say the victim of this sequence, has also earned my deep gratitude for the immense amount of help she has given me by answering my questions, seeking out interesting quilts for me to see, lending her drawings of templates and patterns, on which diagrams on several pages are based, and reading Chapter 4. Mrs. Gordon Hake, which I'm assuming is Mrs. Elizabeth Hake, Miss Muriel Rose, Miss Helen Fitzrandolph, who supplied the information in Appendix 2 about agricultural laborers' earnings, Mr. W. E. Rains, who answered my inquiries about the manufacture of cotton wool and wadding, all deserve my thanks for their help. Finally, I acknowledge with much gratitude the kindness of all those in various ways who in various ways helped me to find and examine old quilts, especially the Cumberland, Northumberland, and Westmoreland Federations of Women's Institutes. Oh, those sound interesting. And the great number of quilters and quilt owners who cheerfully gave their time and ransacked their stores to share their knowledge with me and to show me their work, and in many cases lent precious quilts to be photographed. They are too many to be named here, and every one of them has contributed something to this book. Slinfold, Sussex, 1953, M. Fitzrandolph. All right, so I gotta be honest. I think her writing is much better than, say, Avril Colby. No offense to Avril Colby. All right, so let us start with Chapter 1. We might get through this one. It's kind of a long chapter, but we'll see. Okay, so Chapter 1, the background. "How now, Blown Jack, how now, Quilt," says the prince to Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 1, Act 4, Scene 2, showing that when Shakespeare wrote, the padded quilt was a natural homely image for a fat man. What? By about 1900, the phrase, if it meant anything to most readers of Shakespeare, would have suggested an eiderdown, an object which Shakespeare certainly did not know in anything like its present form. A bed cover of two cloths sewn together with something soft between them is the definition of a quilt in Chambers' 20th Century Dictionary, and that is the sense in which the term is used in this book. The bald definition does not suggest that quilts are a promising subject. But quilting is one of the few handicrafts, and the only needlework still carried on in this country, which embodies an unbroken tradition stretching back to an obscure origin in the distant past. Moreover, the words "sewed together" are important. The lines of stitching which hold together the two pieces of material and the soft padding between form patterns, and it is these which give the traditional quilts their characteristic beauty and interest. Information about the history of quilting is scanty. The Encyclopedia Britannica, 11th edition, tells us that the word quilt came into English from the Old French quilt, C-U-I-L-T-E, which This piece right here, you may remember, has been written this way in literally everyone's book. Dr. Dunton, I'm pretty sure Marie Webster, I'm fairly certain Ruth Fielding, they all use this little piece. So that, the Old French is derived from the Latin colcita or colcitra, meaning a stuffed mattress or cushion. Also, the Low Latin colcita puncta, a stitched or quilted cushion, probably a form of quilt, became through a series of changes counterpane. So colcita puncta becomes counterpane, which is now lost its sense of something padded. Yeah, so I guess at this point, counterpane is really like a bedspread. Although the earliest form of quilt may have been a warm coverlet, quilting was also a great deal in body armor. Oh boy, here comes your Avril Colby's favorite subject. The Norman hauberk might be of chainmail or of thick cotton and old linen, padded and quilted in lozenges, squares, or lines. In the 13th century, the knight's hauberk is worn over a gambeson of linen, quilted linen or cotton, which lesser men wear with a steel cap for all defense. The 14th century knight seems to have been particularly well padded, for he wore a haketon of some soft material, over this a hauberk of mail, over the hauberk a leather garment, and over this again a sleeveless gambeson or pourpoint of leather or quilted work, studded and enriched. My God, that's a lot of layers. I know Avril Colby talked a lot about this, but I don't remember like layers and layers and layers. But if you don't have, I don't know, titanium, and you're gonna get jabbed with a sword, I guess the more you've got on, the better. Chaucer's Sir Thopas, in the latter half of this century, wore a quilted haketon next to his shirt, and over that the Harbergian, a lesser hauberk of chainmail. Froissart mentions a knight whose haketon, worn under his coat of mail, was stuffed with twisted silk. Oh, that's interesting. In fact, a quilted garment of some sort was evidently an essential part of a suit of armor, though it might be worn either under or over the mail, and it was also a satisfactory substitute for the mail. The fully armed man was always a rare figure in war. The country gentleman, serving as light horseman or mounted archer, would hold himself well armed, had he a quilted jacket or brigandine and a bascinet or sallet. Whatever those things are. We think of armor as metal plates or rings because those were the more durable parts of it, which have outlasted their use and can be seen in many collections today. The quilted gambesons, pourpoints, haketons, and jacks of perishable materials have long since crumbled to dust. Druid has the what FSA means. Ooh, let's see. It's a fellow of the Society of... Oh, wait a sec. A fellow of the Society of Actuaries. Okay. I kind of assumed it was one of those things like OBE or something. Okay, the knight returned from the wars may have found that his quilted haketon had its peacetime uses in his drafty castle in winter, and perhaps he wore it until the padding came out at the elbows and his wife threw it away. Just like crappy old tidy-whities. But I'm picturing these quilted, armor things as just being like, I think about the quilted jacket that my mom made my grandmother, and she wore it all the time because she was always cold. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So Druid says an actuary with this designation has completed a rigorous program of advanced exams and coursework demonstrating an in-depth understanding of financial business. Could be. Okay. We do not know whether the quilter of those days exercised his or her ingenuity in something more elaborate than lozenges, squares, or lines, but probably the padding was thick and so no fine stitching would be possible. Much of what we know about quilting since the days of armor can be found in Notes on Quilting issued by the Victoria and Albert Museum. But this writer, in common with others, does not always distinguish between the form of quilt, which is still traditional in Britain, a textile sandwich in which the lines of stitching hold the filling in place between the two layers of material, and other forms which are padded only in parts or even, in some cases, not padded at all. The Sicilian quilt made about 1400, illustrated in the frontispiece to the museum booklet, and often mentioned as the earliest known quilt, is a purely decorative piece of work in which only the design is padded so that it stands up in relief against a flat background. Many other pieces of work illustrated in this booklet, so she's calling this a booklet? This is a pretty lengthy, this is 176 pages. I don't know why she's calling it a booklet. Many other pieces of work illustrated in this booklet are made with a similar technique. The design, outlined usually in backstitch, being stuffed with little wads of wool or with a very loosely spun 2-ply woolen thread, sometimes used double or treble. Now this is interesting. The statement that stitching is usually done in backstitch applies to this work, but not to the traditional wadded quilting in which running stitch was generally used in the past as it is today. So that's interesting because the Welsh quilts, at least, I took a class on Welsh quilting. They were said to use the backstitch. Pretty much only the backstitched. So, and I'm guessing that that stuffing aspect, that quilt, what I showed you at the beginning, so that's a Sicilian quilt made about 1400. So let's look at that again. So bear with me. Let's see where we are on page 23. So this is much older than I thought it was. So here it is again. And so I'm guessing that's why the picture is so good, is because it is there. I mean, this is trapunto. All these feathers and things and stuff are trapunto. Oh no, this is not the same thing. Never mind. When it says when she said frontispiece, I assume that she's talking about this thing, but this is made in 1939, and I should have remembered that. So I don't know what she's talking about as the frontispiece to this. Oh, maybe it's a different booklet she's talking about. Oh, for crying out loud. All right, bear with me. Let's just go back here. I can read. Yeah, I don't know. Let me look at that again, what she's saying. So let's see. Okay, so she's talking about a museum booklet, not this. Many other pieces. Yeah, okay. So she's talking about this Victorian Albert Museum booklet. She does not make very clear here. Okay, so it's Notes on Quilting. All right. That is something I need to find, and I think Dr. Dunton has it. I think it is in Dr. Dunton's collection, so I'm going to have to look and see, because if it is a booklet, I could probably take pictures of all of it, so I'll have to look at that. All right, my bad. All right, where did we leave off? So let's see, the stuffing technique was sometimes combined with that more usual at the present day, in which the padding is first laid in smoothly between the two layers of material and then quilted through. A beautiful 18th century underskirt at the Victorian Albert Museum has its upper part worked in flat wadded quilting in a diamond pattern, and the elaborate design of its lower part stuffed. Possibly these two methods of work were often combined to produce something much grander than the ordinary flat-wadded quilting. Certainly, they were used together in America until the early 19th century. Marie Webster describes some old American white quilts in which the design is further accentuated by having all the most prominent features, such as the leaves and petals of flowers, stuffed. To accomplish this, tiny holes were made on the wrong side of each section of the design, and cotton, and she's got wadding in parentheses, is pushed in with a large needle until the section is stuffed full and tight. This tedious process is followed until every leaf and petal stands out in bold relief. Florence Peto illustrates and describes what she calls a corded spread, in which the whole background is stuffed with a candle wick, inserted from the back between parallel lines of sewing, whilst the design, in 18th century style with flowing leaf, fruit, and flower shapes, is all stuffed from the back with wads of cotton. This was made on Long Island in 1830 to 1831. All right, before we go any further, there are some pictures, other pictures. So let's look at those. So we've got the petticoat that she was just talking about. Let's go to the other screen. Okay. So here's the petticoat she's talking about, and I mean, you can see like the top, obviously, just that grid or that diamond pattern, but you can see some really, really intricate quilting here. So it's 6 feet 4.5 inches wide. Yeah, and it's all done in a running stitch. So 6 feet wide doesn't mean it's that big because that's spread out. But you can tell it's shiny in this picture, so it's definitely silk. I would assume the V&A still has it. Okay, this one. This is an 18th century farmhouse quilt of woolen homespun owned by Mrs. Snaith, Netherton, Northumberland. This is really plain but very pretty. I love these kind of big arched sort of rainbows that are all in the border, and then these giant fans, and then the rest is just a diamond quilting. Now look at this one. So this says cot quilt in sea waves pattern made by the Merthyr Group, South Wales, in the 1930s. So that I would assume cot quilt meaning baby quilt, but that these are very Welsh designs. You've got the spirals, and then the curves are pretty Welshy. She's calling this a sea waves pattern, but we know that as either elbow quilting, because that's how you did the lines, or Baptist fan. Although I really think Baptist fan is really that quarter fan sort of shape, whereas I see these are in some cases almost like a whole, like the full arc almost. Okay. Let me go back to me. Okay. Although the forms of quilting in which the padding is only used for decorative effect and not for warmth were done in England for some hundreds of years, they do not survive as traditional crafts, nor have I found amongst the quilts still preserved in private homes any instance of this additional stuffing of a wadded quilt. These techniques are practiced for the adornment of fine houses or of fine ladies and gentlemen. Wadded quilting, although utilitarian in origin, was not restricted to padding the man of war and keeping the cottager warm. It was used from medieval times to adorn rich hangings and bed coverlets, and in the 17th and 18th centuries, quilted coats, waistcoats, and doublets, dresses, and petticoats were fashionable. Household inventories and other lists of goods from the 15th to the 18th centuries mention quilts, and she's got some, I think, in the appendix. In the latter period, there are of cotton or linen as well as silk, and may be backed with linsey, a mixture of wool and flax, or lutestring, a kind of glossy silk. The multitude of quilts, which must have been made and used in humbler homes throughout this period, have no written record and never found their way into museums. Although this book is about quilts in the strict sense of the term, inevitably patchwork and applied work come into the story because they were so much used by the traditional quilters. Mosaic patchwork, in which small pieces of material cut to geometric shapes are joined together, seem to have been made first in the 18th century and to have been used mainly, then and since, for the top covers of quilted coverlets. No earlier examples of this kind of work are known, and it really bears no relation to the applied work of earlier centuries, generally ecclesiastical. In America, too, this pieced work, as it is called there, seems to have come into existence without any forerunners about the same time. Ruth Finley says that the oldest surviving pieced quilts were made between 1775 and 1800. Although I do think there have been quilts found earlier than 1775, pieced quilts. I do think there's an even earlier one now that they've identified. But this still kind of remains true. Like there's not much. Quilts in general before 1775, are generally chintz and whole cloth. And they're pretty rare. So oldest surviving pieces, and although quilts are mentioned earlier in inventories from 1692 and in advertisements of sales of household goods in 1727 and 1729, these are not necessarily of pieced work. White quilts, that is to say, made of uncut material, are also known in America, but the making of mosaic patchwork and also of applied work, known in the States quite logically as patched work or patchwork, became so popular among the American colonists, and their elaborate designs are so famous that American writers are apt to assume that the mention of a quilt implies pieced or applied work. And I'm guessing, pretty sure when she says applied work, she means applique. Certainly the early settlers took their quilting frames and pattern templates with them, for quilted petticoats were worn by women in the colonial days, and they had quilted curtains as well as bed covers in their houses. Whether mosaic patchwork was first added to quilting in this country or in America, or whether it sprang into existence on both sides of the Atlantic simultaneously, it is impossible to decide. I like to think that it was invented here, and that someone, hearing of the bitter winters and hard living conditions which her emigrated relatives had to endure, decided to send them a warm quilt, and moreover, to give it a gay top cover in this new style, which was much admired and eagerly imitated in the new country. But that is mere conjecture. Marie Webster says that only the English and Dutch settlers quilted, and Ruth Finley adds that the Pennsylvania Dutch quilts are superlative in quilting. The former believes that quilting and the patchwork that came to be associated with it developed so abundantly and have survived so extensively in the United States because of the lonely lives of the pioneer women and their need to be self-sufficing. The quilting bees, when neighbors were invited to come and work at the quilting frame after the patchwork was done, also provided welcome social occasions, and the work met a need for self-expression and for gay decoration in the house. Ruth Finley gives the further information that in the early pioneer days, textiles were precious, nearly all being imported, blankets were not in general use, and the houses were inadequately heated. These three factors helped to popularize quilts, and especially those with one or two covers of patchwork, which made use of every spare scrap of material. In this country, patchwork quilts made in the 18th century or the early years of the 19th are occasionally found. 11. But probably most of them have been worn out. Certainly, many were made later. When any North Country woman of a farming family shows you her collection of quilts made by her mother and grandmother, and even perhaps her great grandmother, that is to say, they date usually from about 1850 to 1910, you are sure to find patchwork amongst them. In fact, the patched quilts will probably outnumber the plain ones. This same is true of South Wales, though here the patchwork is generally of a cruder kind. Oh gosh, because you know those Welsh people. Towards the close of the 18th century, quilted clothing ceased to be fashionable, and even the bed quilt gradually went out of use in most parts of Britain during the 19th century, as factory-made bed covers of various kinds became cheaper and more plentiful. In particular, the Marcella quilt, machine woven of white cotton with a raised edge to imitate the effect of quilting, although it had not the warmth of a wadded quilt, probably did much to drive the hand-stitched quilt out of fashion at a time when machine-made implied novelty and smartness. As the hand-stitched quilt became less common, the word quilt began to be used for other kinds of coverlet. Patchwork covers in particular became, because so many of them were actually padded and stitched in a frame, were often spoken of as patchwork quilts, even when they were not quilted. The tremendous popularity of patchwork in New England has caused the word quilt there to become synonymous with patchwork or piecework. The meaning of the word quilt has been still further confused by some writers on embroidery who have used it to mean any kind of bed covering which is decorated with needlework. Thus, an embroidered quilt may be a counterpane embroidered on a single piece of material, having no connection whatever to the craft of quilting. Oh, goodness. And even today, Mavis, today, you see Afghans called quilts. The designation eiderdown quilt draws yet another red herring across the trail. This, it is true, is a padded bed cover, but the technique of making it is quite different from that of quilting. The down cannot be treated in the same way as wool or cotton wadding, because it would work its way out through holes made by the needle. Apart from the fact that its fluffy nature, in contrast to the fairly compact mass of the paddings used in quilts, would make it difficult, if not impossible, to stitch through. The evidence indicates that in the 19th century, traditional quilting, ignored by the world of fashion, yet held its own in the cottages and farmhouses of England and Wales. But by about the middle of the century, it was going out of use in many parts of the country, although in some districts it was still practiced, in communities which were isolated and not within easy reach of the shops, where the novel factory goods were to be seen, and by people who were poor and must therefore be thrifty. In South Wales and the northern counties of England, it has persisted up to this present day. Possibly quilters could still be found in Scotland. I know of at least one old quilt of Scottish origin and have heard of a few quilters still at work there within recent years. And the general conditions would seem to be of the kind in which quilting was likely to persist. Mrs. Hake, in her book English Quilting, Old and New, Batsford, 1937, told how her researches showed that traditional quilting was still widely done in southwestern England up to about 50 years ago, and similar inquiries might bring evidence to light in other parts of the country. In mid-Wales, it was practiced in many homes until 60 years ago, and some made it their living, according to a correspondent, 90 years old, of Rhayader, Rhayader. In Welsh, that's probably pronounced completely different. But the evidence must be sought soon if it is to be found. Quilts which have fulfilled their comforting purpose for more than 50 years have come to a thin and tattered state. "It's getting a long way on its journey," said an old lady apologetically as she displayed one such relic, with the padding showing through its worn covering. This is 1954. Moreover, since quilting came down in the world in the 19th century and thereafter had little prestige as handicraft until interest in it was revived in the last 30 years or so, It's funny. Okay, so this is 1954, and she's saying, quilting, being revived in the last 30 years or so. But then we hear the same thing about 1976. So quilting has been being revived all along since like the late 1800s, even though people didn't stop quilting. So let's see. Oh gosh. Okay. My computer just made a sound that makes me worry. Okay. All right, I guess that was okay. Yes, right. Ryader. Let me look at that again. Yes, Rhayader. Yeah, it's in Wales, but I don't know. Ryader. I don't know. Okay. So revived in the last 30 years or so. The old quilts have not always been cherished by the younger generation. Mrs. Snaith, I love that name, Snaith, of Northumberland, rescued from amongst the belongings of a neighbor who died at the age of 90 a piece of exquisitely quilted blue silk, 200 years old, and probably intended originally for an underskirt. It had been roughly hacked into 2 strips, pieces had been cut out of it, and it would have been thrown away by the old lady's relatives. Too often have old quilts been used as underlays between mattresses and thus been ruined by rust from the bed springs. That was something that I had heard about at some point, and I think it's a good thing to think about in looking at antique quilts, is particularly if you do see these rust stains, that can be helpful in understanding what it was used for. Because, you see stains on quilts and you're sometimes like, what is this and where did it come from? And Jill and I always joke there's this bizarre historian who seems to think that any sort of stains that look like blood are horse blood, which is weird. I mean, I could see a quilt having blood stains for a variety of reasons that did not involve horses. So, rust stains are, there's that possibility that it's from bed springs. It's a simple explanation. So, anyway. In South Wales, a panel from one of the quilted silk petticoats, which were made in such numbers in the late 19th century and are now so hard to find, was given to a church guild to be made into a banner. The rest, being moth-eaten, was thrown away. A quilter will appreciate and value the work of past generations, but her daughters, if they have never learnt the craft, will discard it as old-fashioned stuff. Oh, truer words have never been spoken. The provincial museums could do much to preserve valuable evidence of this fine traditional handicraft and might save from destruction not only quilts, but also frames and pattern templates which come by inheritance into the hands of those no longer interested in them. The National Museum of Wales preserves in its folk department at St. Fagan's Castle not only old quilts, but also some good modern specimens, and did much to stimulate local appreciation of the craft by its exhibition in the summer of 1951 of ancient and modern Welsh quilting. Okay, so Drew had found a pronunciation. It's Rhayader. Okay, Rhayader. Close. Let's see. Rhayader is famous for its population of red kites. Okay. The Gigrin Farm is one of the best places in the UK to see these majestic birds up close. The center feeds the red kites daily, attracting hundreds of these birds to the skies above. Oh, very cool. Doubtless, the utilitarian qualities of quilting, its homemade warmth, helped to keep it alive. Many accounts of the materials used 50 years ago and more, patchwork of tailors' and dressmakers' pieces, and rag padding, for instance, show that in many homes it was essentially a thrift craft. But the humble craftswoman doubtless found the same satisfaction in creating and stitching their lovely patterns as any other artist finds in his work. As well as bed quilts and cradle covers, they quilted petticoats, which Welsh countrywomen, fishermen's wives on the northeast coast, and Northumberland bondagers continued to wear in stiff, ample folds. Although quilts of the heavier kinds of thrift materials, which were particularly popular in Wales, were necessarily coarse worked, finer work was still done when better materials could be afforded. The framed certificates to be seen on cottage walls in Wales, recording awards for quilting at the Welsh Industries exhibitions held in London in 1903 and 1904, and at the International Exhibition at the White City in 1911, and probably others, indicated that even the wider commercialized world did then, perhaps through the influence of the arts and crafts movement, recognize quilting as a fine handicraft, though little interest seems to have been taken in it generally. But a few discerning women began to notice the beautiful work which was done so unpretentiously and thought so little of. Amongst others, Miss Alice Arms in County Durham and Lady Lisburn in southwest Wales took pains to bring quilting to more general notice and to encourage the quilters. Lady Lisburn. During the last 30 years, Oh, she's got a note here too. Let's see. Where did I just see this? Okay, so the Northumberland bondagers. So a bondager is a woman field worker in the border country. A woman field worker. Poor lady. So during that last 30 years, a quantity of traditional quilted work has appeared in handcraft exhibitions, so much has been written about it. But little research has been done to trace its history back through the dark ages of the last 150 years. She's calling the Victorian era the dark ages. To the time when it disappeared from the fashionable world. This book is an attempt to fill the gap, and although it can, at this date, be filled only with scattered and sketchy pictures, these do throw some light upon the social history of our country. And that is chapter 1. Let me quickly show you a few of the pictures. She's actually got a decent amount of pictures in here. Okay. So this is part of a wedding quilt made in Weardale about 1911 by Miss Humble, owned by Miss M.E. Milburn. I love that. Miss Humble. Well, Miss Humble, you needn't be humble. Your quilt looks absolutely stunning. Very pretty. Look at that medallion in the center. Okay, this is a close-up. So this pieces of quilted blue silk, mid-18th century, probably intended for a petticoat, owned by Mrs. Snaith. Very pretty. And then here we have mussel gatherers at Runswick about 1870, some wearing quilted skirts. And it's kind of hard to see, but I don't know. It seems like these black skirts are probably not what is quilted. It's probably maybe these overskirt things that are quilted. And here we have an unusual type of quilting frame from Weardale with ratchets, owned by Mrs. Graham Pert. And you could see the wheel with the ratchets. Now, that's not that unusual now. I mean, that's like if you were going to buy, a nice wooden old school hand quilting frame, that's typically what you'd get now with those wooden ratchets versus 2x4s that have been clamped together. Yeah. And that is that. Well, guys, I threw a whole bunch of stuff at you. But it is almost 4 o'clock my time. So we will pick up on chapter 2, The Quilters, on Thursday. And I will report back on Thursday of how how AI does with that clip where I talked about the books. We'll see what it comes up with. I'll be very, very interested. And I'll run it through both Chat GPT and Perplexity to see what happens. Chat GPT, I have never personally, well, I take that back. Early on in using Chat GPT, I did get a hallucination. And it was about a particular book or something. It was like supposedly written by, and I'm like, oh, no. I know who wrote that. I literally know the person that wrote that book. So, but I have not had anything like that lately. So we'll have to see, to see what happens. So, all right. I will talk to you guys later. I hope you had a good weekend, by the way. I talked about my weekend. I didn't ask you guys about yours. So I hope you had a good weekend and have a wonderful week. If you're joining me and Jill for quilt nerding tomorrow night, I'm not 100% sure what we're looking at. It might be part 2 of Shelburne. She does have something that she said, I will go crazy over. I think I know what it is. I have a general idea. And it is wonderfulness. So if that's what we're looking at, you will not want to miss it. But yeah, if you don't follow us there, then I will see you on Thursday. So have a wonderful week, my dear friends. I couldn't do it without you. I wouldn't want to do it without you. Yeah. Oh, great info today. Thanks, Robin. Glad to hear. Yeah. Okay, guys. I will see you soon. Mwah, 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 mwah. Bye.